It took my mother. I was just 10 years old when I witnessed the horrific death of my mother at the hands of a skinwalker. It had taken the shape of what is known as a dog man, a tall, black, upright walking wolf. That night, a bitter, cold, winter evening, I will never forget. We were huddled in our cabin, trying to stay warm, when my mother went outside to gather some firewood. Normally my father would have been there to keep us safe, and he would have been if he hadn't been arrested that very same day, falsely accused of murdering a man over a gambling dispute. When I heard a scream followed by growling, I rushed to the window and saw my mother being attacked by the beast. It was unlike any wolf I had ever seen before, towering on its hind legs, snarling fiercely. Its eyes glowed bright yellow in the darkness. She had no chance. The creature sank its teeth into her neck, and I saw her blood spill across the snow. I watched helplessly as her lifeless body was dragged away into the night. Left alone for 3 more days, in the middle of one of the harshest winters, with only the snow falling around me, I waited. When my father returned home, he was crushed by the sight of me. "Stop joking, Maka," he said, but the expression on my face and the tears in my eyes made him realize this wasn't a prank. That moment set off a series of events that drove my father into despair. He turned to drinking, and with the alcohol came anger and violence. It wasn't until later that I discovered skinwalkers and their power to shift into any animal they choose. I don't understand why my mother was chosen, or why it happened to her, but it's a night that will stay with me forever. The memory of her screams and the image of that wolf continue to haunt me to this day. The people on the reservation were aware of skinwalkers but were too frightened to take any action. There were whispers that my father had a debt and that the skinwalker had been sent to kill him, but instead, it found my mother. As years passed, I got married on the reservation. On the day of my wedding, I was receiving a blessing from the tribal elders when one of them spoke up, saying that I carry the curse of the skinwalker, and that when I reach the same age as my mother, it will come for me, because I witnessed it with my own eyes. When asked what to do, he responded that he would assist only if I kept it a secret, and if I was willing to do what others wouldn't. 3 days later, he called for me, and I went to meet him at his house. Imagine the scene as I walked in. Upon entering, you are immediately struck by the warmth and inviting atmosphere. The walls are crafted from adobe or wood, and the floor is covered with woven rugs or animal hides. The air carries the sweet, smoky aroma of burning sage or cedar, used to purify and cleanse the room. In one corner, there is a small altar adorned with feathers, crystals, and other sacred items. There are no chairs or sofas. Instead, cushions and blankets are spread across the floor, encouraging you to sit or lie down. We sat together, and he began mixing herbs, saying, "What you are about to experience is the truth from the spirit realm. There, you'll find the answer to who killed your mother. When you see the person, remember, they can see you too." He handed me a drink and instructed me to lie down. Soon after, I felt an unusual sensation, as if I were floating in the air. I found myself in a woodland, and as I ventured further into it, strange visions began to appear. The trees seemed to twist and bend in odd ways, and the colors of the forest were more vibrant than I had ever experienced. Suddenly, a man appeared in front of me. At first I thought it was just a play of the light, but as he got closer, I noticed he was changing. His form seemed to shift and contort, and in no time he had morphed into a large, black wolf. I followed him as he sprinted through the forest, his fur flowing behind him. At that moment, I don't think he noticed me, but as we neared what I assumed was his home, he turned and asked, "Who are you?" I answered, "Did you kill my mother?" He looked at me with a sense of recognition, then turned and crouched before entering a house. Then there were flashes of swirling colors and trees crashing down. When I regained consciousness, the elder was there and asked me what I had seen. He seemed to know exactly where it was and who it was. That day, I discovered the truth. My father did have a gambling debt, and the shaman who had been hired was feared across 3 states for his mystical abilities. Later that night, he appeared to me in a dream, the shaman, that is. He told me he respected my courage in entering the spirit realm to find him, that my mother's death wasn't his doing, but his responsibility. He said he would not harm me, my children, or my grandchildren if I kept his secret. To prove it was genuine, he left a feather beneath my pillow. When I woke up, it was there, a feather. I never sought any further answers, and I didn't share this story until after he passed away. Yet even now, people still fear him, as if he could rise from the dead. The Phantom Rider. This tale, handed down through generations in my family for over a century, carries a cautionary message that resonates even today. It was relayed to me by my father, just as his father had recounted it to him. As the sun dipped below the horizon over the reservation, our Shoshone ancestors gathered in their modest dwelling. The bitter night winds howled relentlessly, causing the structure to creak and tremble. Huddled close under shared blankets, the family sought warmth and comfort. Yet an unsettling sense of unease lingered, impossible to ignore. In the nights that followed, peculiar occurrences began to unfold. Hoofbeats echoed outside, as though a horse were galloping nearby. Initially dismissed as mere gusts of wind, the sounds grew more insistent and difficult to disregard. The family could hear the horse circling their home, its whinnies and snorts breaking the silence of the dark. Each time the men ventured out to inspect the horses, they found them securely tied and accounted for. There was no evidence of any having escaped or been taken. Have you ever experienced a deep sense of unease? Not outright fear or panic, but a feeling that something is just not quite right. They tried to make sense of the noises, convincing themselves it was just a stray animal, or perhaps a neighbor's wandering horse. Yet deep down, they knew better. The sounds were too consistent, always coming at the same late hour every night. One evening, a dense fog crept across the reservation, cloaking everything in a thick, swirling mist. Visibility dropped to just a few feet, and the wind whipped the fog into eerie, shifting patterns. Their voices were barely audible over the gusts, but the distinct sound of hoofbeats outside reached them clearly. Then came a whisper, low and unnerving, as though it were right beyond the walls. Paralyzed by fear, my second great-grandfather struggled to comfort his family. The whispers grew louder, and they began to distinguish words, a voice speaking in Shoshone, but the phrases were distorted and unnatural, as though something sinister was calling his name. The noise escalated until it filled their ears, and then abruptly it stopped. In the following days, strange events unfolded. Objects seemed to move on their own, disembodied whispers and chanting echoed around them, and the wind howled with unsettling intensity. Each night, the fog returned, heavier and more ominous than before. It felt hostile, as if it sought to harm them, yet no harm had come. Seeking answers, my great-grandfather turned to a medicine man for guidance. The elder advised him to pray to the Great Spirit, asking for clarity and the strength to dispel their fear. A few evenings later, while the family gathered for supper, the sound of hooves echoed outside once more. This time, however, the noise was different, closer and seemingly just outside their dwelling. The family could hear the horses snorting and whinnying, followed by the sound of a rider dismounting and footsteps drawing nearer. Summoning the courage he had gained through his prayers, my second great-grandfather rose slowly, stepped toward the entrance of the tent, and cautiously peeked outside. There stood a spectral figure, clad in the ceremonial war attire of ancient Shoshone warriors. Behind him loomed a ghostly horse, its facial skin deteriorating and radiating an unearthly glow. The apparition spoke in a hushed tone, identifying himself as a long-departed ancestor. He explained that he had come to deliver a vital message for his living descendants, a message to be preserved and passed down through generations. The figure foretold calamities that would afflict humanity: wars, destruction, floods, earthquakes, death, and chaos. He warned of a time when wolves would roam freely, and the unseen would cross into the world of the living. These, he said, were the days of devastation. Why share this now? Because the time of the breached veil has arrived. The beings hidden behind that barrier are emerging, and their true nature is neither what you perceive nor what you chase. My family has encountered them, battled them, and soon you too will face them as they emerge from the shadows into the light. Be ready, for when you flee into the mountains, you will enter their domain. Why cops dislike the reservations. I had been patrolling these roads for years, but I had never encountered anything like this before. Towering at least 10 feet tall, this creature was covered in hair from head to toe, with eyes that glowed eerily in the dark. It was unmistakably a Bigfoot, standing in the road near the Native American reservation. To me, what happens on the reservations is their concern. You wanted the land, it's yours, along with all the strange issues that come with it. Skinwalkers, werewolves, missing children. That's your territory, not mine. In the past, when I'd come across strange things near the edges of the reservation, I'd usually just turn a blind eye. But this time, there was no way to ignore it. As I drove past, the creature decided to charge straight at my car, crashing into the front passenger side panel. The impact sent my car veering off the road and into a ditch. If you've ever been in a car crash, you know that sense of shock and helplessness. Your heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through your veins. For a moment I was so disoriented that I forgot why I had crashed into a tree at the side of the road. Then I heard it, the sound of branches snapping and leaves rustling, growing closer. I realized the Bigfoot was near. Tightening my grip on the shotgun, I braced for the worst. The driver's side door was jammed, so I scrambled toward the passenger side to try to escape. But I was trapped. That's when I caught sight of it from the corner of my eye. It was staring right at me, huge, at least 8 feet tall, with a powerful build and sparse patches of gray and black hair. Without hesitation, I raised my shotgun and fired a blast through the windshield, shards of glass scattering everywhere, all while remembering to call for reinforcements. Shots fired, I yelled into the radio, confident they could track my location. My attack seemed to provoke it even more, as it charged once again. I fired another round through the windshield, this time striking it, causing it to retreat into the forest. I knew I needed to stay alert, as the creature could return at any moment. Quickly checking myself for injuries, I found a few cuts and bruises, but nothing severe. I attempted to open the car door again, but it remained jammed tight. I was trapped. The sound of movement in the bushes signaled its return. I steadied myself, aiming the shotgun, partially leaning out of the shattered windshield, and fired another shot. This time, I missed. The creature was too quick. Suddenly, the distant wail of sirens reached my ears. Their backup was on the way, but I needed to survive until they arrived. And then, everything fell silent. Reflecting on it now, it makes no sense because I had just heard the sirens. You know that sensation you get when flying in an airplane, when your ears are clogged and there's that odd silence? That's exactly what it felt like, except there was no plane, no altitude. Just me, trapped in the car, with that thing lurking in the woods. Then it roared, the sound sharper and more concentrated, as if it were coming straight at me from some kind of parabolic dish. It burned my eyes, hurt my ears, and made my skin feel hot, while my vision turned blurry. That's when I saw it approaching again, and I fired another shot. I could hear people shouting my name before everything went dark. When I regained consciousness, I was in the back of an ambulance with an IV in my arm. They told me I was suffering from dehydration, but I wasn't convinced. Once I stepped out, my commanding officer was there. He explained they had seen it too, Bigfoot. They'd tried to follow it, but it retreated back onto the reservation. Furious, I wanted to put an end to it, but he made it clear there was nothing we could do. It was on tribal land. In the following months, I frequently patrolled that road, keeping my personal rifle in my vehicle. I did everything within my power, short of crossing into the reservation, to get its attention. Writing tickets, standing outside the car, I could always sense it watching. But I think it realized that if it came for me again, one of us wasn't walking away. And I swear, it wouldn't have been me. The shaman and the chief. I serve as a tribal police officer on a Native American reservation. Lately, I've been plagued by haunting nightmares. Each time I close my eyes, a dark figure looms in my dreams, leaving me waking in a cold sweat. This morning I had to leave the reservation to visit a hospital in the city. My mother, who is battling cancer, is receiving treatment there. The doctors plan to update us on her condition today. While waiting at the hospital, I received several work-related calls, but I declined them 3 times. After 45 minutes, the doctors informed us that the results would come later in the day. I hugged my mother, said goodbye, and then headed back to work. When I arrived, my supervisor called me in for a serious discussion about my commitment and attendance. Although he was understanding due to my mother's illness, the department was short-staffed, and an important case required my attention. He handed me a file about 2 teenage girls who had gone missing from the reservation. They had vanished from their home while their parents were working at the casino. In that moment, I felt the weight of their parents' anguish as if it were my own. The drive to the scene became a time of deep reflection, questions of doubt and despair swirling in my mind. Why is this happening to my mother? Why am I the one assigned to this case? But arriving at the house was like a jolt back to reality, clearing those thoughts. I shifted my focus entirely. There was a job to do. As I started searching outside the house, it felt as though my own child had vanished. I walked around the exterior, but everything appeared normal except for some long strands of hair on the windowsill and a trail of footprints leading into the forest. These clues indicated that the girls might have climbed out through the window and left on their own. I followed the tracks into the woods, but they eventually faded. Despite questioning the distressed parents, their responses provided little assistance. Later that day, I got a call from the doctors informing me that my mother had only 6 months to live. A wave of emotions crashed over me like a storm. I felt utterly overwhelmed. Have you ever experienced that sinking feeling? A foreboding sense that something worse is coming, but you can't pinpoint what. That was how it felt, like the weight of more bad news was about to fall, and it did, almost immediately. Not long after, I received another call about the girls, but it wasn't the kind of lead I had hoped for. A local shaman phoned from a gas station just outside town. He claimed to have had a dream in which a skinwalker had taken the girls. He warned me that it was connected to dark magic and urged caution, but he also claimed to know where they were. He described a remote area of the reservation with a steep incline leading up to a plateau, a site he said was used for rituals. I relayed this lead to my boss, but he dismissed it outright. Skinwalkers, he said, were just stories his grandparents used to frighten him when he was young. When I told him I intended to investigate, he refused, insisting he had a more credible lead. He said the girls had been spotted at a casino in town, suggesting they had simply left the reservation. He directed me to pursue that angle instead. We had a disagreement, but eventually he persuaded me to go to the casino. The lead turned out to be false. On my way back, I stopped by the hospital to visit my mother and offer her some comfort. Afterward, I went home. But that night, something entered my house. It was tall, covered in hair, and shadowy. It made contact with me while I was asleep. When I woke up, I found strands of hair on my bed. I couldn't fall back asleep and stayed awake from 3 a.m. until 6. No matter what, sleep evaded me. At 7 a.m., I got a call reporting that the bodies of the 2 missing girls had been found dumped in a ravine on the reservation. Their throats had been slit, their fingers severed, and the skin on their cheeks was missing. When I arrived at work, my supervisor was visibly upset. Shortly after, we received another call from the shaman, questioning why I hadn't gone. I put the call on speaker, and my boss decided to bring him in for questioning. The shaman's tone shifted, and anger filled his voice. The room's lights flickered, and his voice seemed to take on a different quality in his rage. Before ending the call, he told my boss that the girl's blood was on his hands. Now listen to this. A week later, it was time for the burial ceremony for the 2 girls. We went to offer the family our condolences. Losing a child is devastating, but losing 2 at once is almost unbearable. We took separate vehicles, with my boss driving ahead of me. As I followed, I saw something that I still can't fully explain. My boss appeared to be alone in his truck, but for a brief moment, I thought I saw another figure seated beside him. I could clearly make out their heads. Moments later, his truck suddenly sped up, swerved off the road, and collided with a tree. When I arrived to help him, he had a broken leg and fractured ribs. By the time he reached the hospital, one of his ribs had punctured his lung. He required major surgery and remained in the hospital for several weeks. One day, while I was in the office, at that time, I was serving as the acting chief in charge. A shaman who had called earlier entered the building. He walked into my office and shut the door behind him. It seemed as though no one else in the building noticed him. I watched through my office window as he walked straight in. He told me that I had been placed in charge because of the purity of my heart, and that the people of the reservation needed someone with a pure heart to confront the coming evil. After delivering his message, he left just as quietly as he had entered. I have been chief ever since, and many of the stories you are about to read come from the people on my reservation. These are matters to be respected, and in some cases, feared. This is not a game or a joke. Consider yourself warned.